Grand Slam Track League was the worst thing to happen to track and field in 2025, and its bankruptcy will make investors shy away from putting money into our sport for years to come. We're going to break down the timeline of Grand Slam, what went wrong at each stage, and what it means for track and field. In June 2024, former 400-meter world record holder Michael Johnson announced that he was going to revolutionize track and field by starting his own professional track league. Painted as the future of the sport, Johnson was going to solve track's supply problem, citing that outside of the Olympics and World Championships, there are no spectator-friendly track and field meets with high stakes. And if there were such events, then those meets would gather millions of views and equivalent interest. Grand Slam was going to satisfy the sleeping demand, and Michael Johnson was going to be the one to do it over 4 meets in its inaugural season. And the league was going to do things differently. Grand Slam was going to cut all of the field events, the 3,000-meter steeplechase and the 10,000-meter track race, to give the fans what they really want to watch: track races. Which, if you're just a distance track fan, might be pretty exciting. It's kind of frustrating to be transferred over for 90 seconds to someone throwing or jumping and then thrown right back into the middle of a distance race where you have to figure out what happened in the last lap and a half. So in theory, there was merit to this idea. We won't go into too much detail on how the league operated in terms of its standings, but just know that Grand Slam was going to bring in the best track athletes in the world to compete in 2 events at each meet, which are called slams. And that over the course of a few months, there will be 4 of these slams. And for every race that an athlete places in one of these slams, they will be compensated handsomely. No prize money has ever been offered at this scale over 4 competition dates, so athletes would be motivated to compete and win. At the league's announcement, we found out that Grand Slam had raised over $30 million in financial commitments to make this league happen, and that $13 million of this $30 million came in the form of an investment from a company called Winners Alliance. Winners Alliance is a for-profit affiliate of the Professional Tennis Players Association that invests in athlete-centric businesses, and its chairman is the hedge fund billionaire Bill Ackman. More on that later. But the Grand Slam track name was inspired by Grand Slam tennis, which makes sense given Winners Alliance's origins. And already, on day 1 of the announcement of Grand Slam track, the odds of them succeeding were overwhelmingly against them. On the one hand, finally, a company revolving around the sport of track and field is receiving a massive injection of capital. Tens of millions of dollars were going to be spent on track meets. The world's best talent in track and field were going to compete against each other outside of the Olympics and World Championships. There would be high stakes, and track fans would be treated to special performances. On the other hand, there were some deep-seated concerns about this announcement, especially from those who had been in track and field for a long time. Concern number 1 was there isn't as much as a supply problem as Michael Johnson thinks, because this implies there's this massive sleeping demand that's waiting to be unleashed at a better product. And a skeptic would say, where is this track demand? Let me get my Ouija board out. Is it in the room with us right now? Should we split up and find it? Go to any NCAA meet where there are world-class sprinters and just walk into the stadium and you can watch hours for free. Yes, the athletes are better in Grand Slam, but are people really going to watch just because you cut field events and increase the prize pool for athletes? A lot of people, like myself, didn't think so. It seemed like Johnson was putting all of his eggs in this sleeping demand basket. Concern number 2 was the prize pool and appearance fees. Johnson made it a point to pay these athletes what they deserve, citing that for the amount of talent these athletes are displaying, they are not compensated properly for it. And he's right. But when there's already so little money in our sport, who's going to pay them? If you read between the lines, there's this indirect insinuation going on that there's all of this money going around in track and field and the athletes are getting shorthanded. And regardless whether you believe that's the case, Johnson was going to fix it by rewarding these athletes with prize money the track world has never seen, ranging from $100,000 for first place all the way down to $10,000 for 8th, which compared to the Diamond League, the biggest and most prestigious track and field circuit in all of our sport and the most comparable to Grand Slam, offered $10,000 for first all the way down to $500 for 8th. Now, after the announcement of Grand Slam, Diamond League actually increased their prize winnings, but that's a totally separate topic in general. The fact is, at the time of the announcement, Grand Slam was offering 8th place finishers in their race what Diamond Leagues were offering the winners in theirs. The difference was stark. And with all of this expenditure of money, one would have to think, if the prize money in Grand Slam was so lucrative, what were the appearance fees? This wasn't known at the time, but now we know the answer is a lot. And the main reason why we're comparing the Diamond League to Grand Slam is the Diamond League has a blueprint on how to run a successful track and field league. Their costs and revenues balance to a point where it makes a great experience for the fans, as well as a profitable business for the Diamond League owners. To announce a league that's going to compete with the Diamond League, and then announce that one of your differentiating factors is that your prize money is going to be 10 times the amount of your #1 competitor, it's not good business. In theory, this is great for athletes, but only if you get 10 times the amount of revenue on the demand side to cover its cost. Again, we're coming back to this sleeping demand theme. But one would think if you're gonna have 10 times the cost to pay athletes what they deserve, wouldn't you want to see if you could do it in the first place to make sure you can afford it? Wouldn't you first want a season of selling tickets and securing broadcasting deals and sponsorship deals before you start paying the athletes more? Johnson thought that his track meet would be differentiating enough to bring in a mass amount of demand right away. Totally backwards thinking here. And here we're gonna hit a reoccurring theme in the whole Grand Slam saga. Johnson frequently towed the line in his announcements and interviews between arrogance and confidence. I got the vibe that Johnson painted himself as this Steve Jobs-esque character. He was gonna save track and field, he was gonna pay athletes what they deserve, and he was gonna host the best track and field meets outside of the Olympics and World Championships. And he was gonna do it on his own terms. The folded arms or the triangle fingers, the black long sleeves. It's like some tech entrepreneur 10 years down the line reminiscing on his billion-dollar empire. That might be an unfair analysis, but there was something unsettling about the photo shoots and the grand statements coming from someone who's never hosted a track and field meet at this scale, never mind run a business of this magnitude. Concern number 3, and arguably the most important one, was overvaluation. The amount of money invested in Grand Slam was a lot, and it was questionable whether the right people financed this deal, as Winners Alliance had never invested into anything like this before. With $30 million in financial commitments, the profit expectations for Grand Slam down the line might have set Michael Johnson and his league up for failure from the get-go. And as soon as the money exchanged hands, Johnson was no longer grounded in reality. He had to go big or go home to justify those investments. He had to believe by necessity that there was this massive demand and that he was going to solve the supply problem. Now, even today, we know very little about the original investments made into Grand Slam and the cash flow projections they made to justify it. What we do know is that $13 million went to Grand Slam from Winners Alliance and converted into shares. We know later reports claim that this was for a minority share in the business, which, if true, would put the valuation of Grand Slam at least at $26 million. And we know Grand Slam was expected to lose money in at least its first year of operation. So to highlight my point on the financial expectations of Grand Slam, let's put some numbers behind a company that's worth $26 million, hypothetically. So stay with me, we're gonna get a little academic here. In this example, we're going to value a company at $26 million by generating future cash flows, by discounting cash flows for 10 years. We're gonna be using a 20% discount rate, which is just the numerical representation of the risk and uncertainty of forecasting future earnings. Have you ever heard the saying, a dollar today is worth more than a dollar tomorrow? Discount rates are the same concept. There's a 100% chance of getting a dollar today when there's a little chance you won't get it tomorrow. A discount rate represents that uncertainty of not getting that dollar tomorrow. And 20% is being very generous for a startup. In this example, we're going to give this company leeway to lose money for 3 years, losing $15 million in year 1, $10 million in year 2, $5 million in year 3, and finally breaking even with $5 million in profit in year 4. Do you know what kind of money this company would have to make years 4 through 10 to justify this $26 million valuation? Here's what it would look like. We're talking tens of millions of dollars in profit, closing in on $100 million in year 10. To put in perspective, the UFC first made $100 million in 2015. This is purely theoretical. Again, we don't know the projections used to justify this valuation, but the numbers used would prove equally as fantastical. And that's if the league was valued at $26 million and not more, or if we didn't use a higher discount rate. Institutional investors are here to make money, and with ventures like Grand Slam, they're here to make a lot of it. Whatever way this company was valued, whatever the projections were, Johnson had a monumental task ahead of him, and he had to spend big money to meet these projections, rather than deal with the world as it is today. This league is not an infinitely scalable technology company. You sell tickets, broadcasting rights, ads, and merchandise. Really quick, if you liked the video so far, please like and subscribe down below. Back to the video. And finally, concern number 4. Was Michael Johnson the right one for the job? He's one of the best athletes in history, period. A world record holder for decades, multiple Olympic gold medals, competed professionally until his late 30s. But could his greatness in athletics transfer over to entrepreneurship? Could he overcome the obstacles already in his way? Time would tell. Now, these 4 announcements I listed could have been drawn after day 1 of the announcement. In my opinion, it was already a train wreck. And Johnson required exceptional execution from here on out to put this train back on track. Beyond the photo shoots and epic quotes, it was time to put his nose to the grindstone and get to work. Fast forward to November 2024, Johnson announced where and when these slams would take place. And they would take place in Kingston, Jamaica, Miramar, Florida, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and LA, California, from April to late June. And where these meets were and the timing of them were questionable. As I've said before, track and field is not a profitable sport. There are 2 events that all professional track and field athletes train for: World Championships and the Olympics. This is where they earn most of their money from sponsors. No shoe company will fund your existence if you're not competing at these 2 stages. So why would you put these slams in the months leading up to World Championships in Grand Slam's inaugural season? You're disrupting these athletes' training, and some will outright refuse to compete in your league just because they don't feel it's worth it. And the ones that will go will demand extremely high compensation because they're peaking early in the season and risking not performing as well at World Championships, which, spoiler alert, actually happened. But these costs are unnecessary for Grand Slam as well as the athletes. Why not have the inaugural slams after World Championships when all the athletes are in peak physical condition? And instead of having 4 meets in your inaugural season, have 2 or 3. In 2026, this year, there's no World Championships or Olympics. Grand Slam could have had their 2nd season this year, and athletes would feel more inclined to go, and at a much lower cost. Furthermore, having Grand Slam after World Championships is just free marketing. People are still interested in track. Grand Slam would be piggybacking off peak interest in our sport. Imagine being a casual fan, just watching a fan favorite come forth, just missing the podium in the 1500 meters, or watching an underdog who wasn't even supposed to make the finals medal at World Championships. And then you see those 2 compete against each other 2 weeks later at Grand Slam. The vibe is different. It's electric. The high stakes write themselves. And after 2 or 3 slams after World Championships, you would have a pretty good idea of who's interested in your league, so you could adjust appropriately for next season. In my opinion, this was a huge missed opportunity. The location of these meets were also dubious. I said this in one of my previous videos right here, that why would you have your opening meet in Kingston, Jamaica? Yes, Jamaicans love track and field, and they have a very rich history in the sport. But one thing Jamaicans don't have is first world money. The GDP per capita in Jamaica is around $8,000. How are you going to sell a 35,000 capacity stadium for $10 to $100 each ticket? I get it that sponsorships and broadcasting rights might be more important than ticket sales, but you're shooting yourself twice in the foot here. Nobody was going to buy those tickets, and sponsors and viewers don't like looking at empty stadiums in your very first meet. Kingston, Jamaica made no sense at all. And then Miramar, Florida right after. Anson's Stadium in Miramar is a small stadium. It's a beautiful track with a good viewing experience. I've actually raced there twice, no complaints. I actually really enjoy racing there, but I feel like there are better options. Major track hubs or bigger cities like New York, Portland, Eugene, Oregon come to mind. Again, it wasn't really well thought out, and you're starting your league behind the 8 ball. In February 2025, Grand Slam had its first big win. It secured a broadcasting deal and a streaming deal with CW and Peacock. If you look at other sports leagues or entities, these deals are massive. It seemed like even though there was some skepticism on how Grand Slam was going to generate enough revenue to fund its operations, this was a big step in the right direction. The deal was undisclosed, but the magnitude of the deal was assumed to be on par with the magnitude of the league and the league's announcement, which is huge. But beneath the hood, things were a lot more chaotic within Grand Slam itself. Remember that $30 million plus in financial commitments received by Grand Slam? Well, $19 million of that 30 plus million was actually from Winners Alliance, the same company that gave them the original $13 million for shares. But this $19 million was the right to buy more shares, but not the obligations to convert it. And in November 2024, Winners Alliance let Grand Slam know that they weren't going to convert their $19 million into Grand Slam shares, which means Grand Slam would not have the money. The league went into damage control and hired PJT Partners, an investment bank from New York, to find potential investors to come up with the shortfall. And from January to March, PJT Partners reached out to over 150 potential investors, which included over 30 pitch meetings, and all of the investors declined to invest, except for one. Eldridge Industries signed a $30 million non-committal term sheet with Grand Slam with the option of investing $10 million more. From Grand Slam's perspective, absolutely life-saving. So behind the scenes, it was chaotic, like most early-stage ventures. But Johnson seemed to have avoided a catastrophe by maneuvering Grand Slam into a new $30 million plus capital injection that would save the inaugural season and his league. And in April 2025, finally, it was here. The very first Grand Slam meet was taking place in Kingston, Jamaica. And this is what it looked like. Virtually empty. In its first slam of the season, we saw the consequences of holding your meet in a city and in a country that can't afford your tickets for what you're providing. The people of Kingston were flat out uninterested in attending this meet. Look at the stands, and everybody noticed right away. And the speculation of how this league was going to sustain itself was suddenly rampant again. But wait, remember that streaming and broadcasting deal signed between Peacock and CW and Grand Slam? Well, you could have streamed live all 3 days of the Kingston meet, and later all 2 days of the Philadelphia meet for free on the YouTube channel Total Running Productions. To put it in some perspective, the Peacock streaming service charges around $8 per month for a subscription. So that begs the question, how lucrative and exclusive was this streaming and broadcasting deal if other people are hosting it for free? How much money actually exchanged hands? The answer is a lot less than originally thought. At this point, it seemed every announcement made by Grand Slam was an embellishment or just an outright gimmick. As soon as the rubber hit the road, nothing was holding up for Grand Slam. And behind closed doors, it was even worse. One of the requirements of the $30 million term sheet deal between Eldridge and Grand Slam was how well was the first meet going to do. And Eldridge officials showed up to this meet and didn't like what they saw, to say the least. So after the event, Eldridge informed Johnson that they would not be investing any money with them. The $30 million was off the table. We were seeing in real time the consequences play out from decisions made up in the lead up to the inaugural season. Having your first meet in Kingston was such a misstep, and way more than originally thought. In May 2025, the league had its second slam in Miramar, Florida, and its attendance was way better than before, even though it's a much smaller stadium. But it was still underwhelming. Watching it live or through replays, you couldn't help but think that this league wasn't playing out how it was originally envisioned. And this was confirmed when CW, the broadcasting network, released some of their numbers regarding the Kingston and Philadelphia Slam. The Saturday and Sunday viewing numbers for both slams were around 250,000 per day. Comparing that to some of the viewing numbers of the flagship Diamond League meets like the Prefontaine Classic or the Diamond League Finals, their viewing numbers were around 600,000 to 1.7 million. And that's not even comparing other professional track and field meets like the Grand Prix. In all fairness, Diamond League doesn't always get these huge amount of views. They can get much lower, but their events consistently piggyback off the interest of World Championships and Olympics, something Grand Slam was not doing. Grand Slam's viewing numbers might even be considered good without the context of everything going on around it. But unfortunately, there is context. To pay your athletes 10 times more than the Diamond League pays their athletes means you need to have 10 times the scale or 10 times the margin to cover that. At this point, we were really seeing Grand Slam struggle, averaging 3 to 7 times less viewership than the big Diamond League meets, and they certainly weren't making 10 times the margin. In June 2025, Grand Slam came up with some adjustments for its third slam in Philadelphia, cutting the 3-day event to 2 days, which turned out to be a great call, because of all the slams so far, Philadelphia was by far the most successful. The stands were almost full, people showed up to watch track, and if this was your first slam, you might even say to yourself, this Grand Slam track thing might even have a chance. This was a great setup for the finale of Grand Slam's inaugural season in LA, California, which would be the biggest one yet. Except it wasn't. On June 12th, the finale of Grand Slam track was canceled. In part of Michael Johnson's statement on the cancellation, he said, "The decision to conclude the inaugural Grand Slam track season is not taken lightly, but one rooted in a belief that we have successfully achieved the objectives we set out in this pilot season, and the importance of looking towards 2026 and beyond." Now, a lot of what I said about the finances of Grand Slam wasn't officially released yet, but even so, people could see Grand Slam's true position. And this statement left a very sour taste in a lot of people's mouths. This seemed like the ultimate cope, or even an outright lie to buy Johnson more time from the walls that are closing in. Imagine you're in a boxing match, and you're just getting lit up. You're getting caught with jabs and right hooks for 7 rounds straight. You're all bloodied, you can barely stand straight, and in the 7th round, you get hit and you fall down. And the ref is standing over you. He says 5, 6, 7, And on the count of 8, you stand to your feet. You look at your opponent and you say, I think you've had enough. And you walk out of the stadium, Rocky Balboa style. That's what this felt like. This felt like a defeat disguised as a win. Nobody was buying the success story. Johnson would later allude to things like tariffs and economic conditions on why the LA finale wasn't going to happen, but this was further straw grasping, grabbing to anything on the way down, trying to search for stability but finding nothing. And the walls were closing in. With the lack of financing, athletes had not been paid their prize money from the previous 3 slams and only half of their appearance fee. Remember we talked about earlier the potential dangers of bragging about your costs being 10 times higher than your #1 competitor? We're seeing the realities of that play out now. Grand Slam's expenses far exceeded the revenue they were bringing in. This was a problem. On July 3rd, people really got to see how bad things were within the business, as reports claim that $13 million in appearance fees and prize money had gone unpaid, including around $3 million for the Kingston meet alone, their first meet. Johnson promised that at the end of the month, the money owed for Kingston would be paid, and all of the other athletes' compensation regarding the Miramar and Philadelphia Slam would be paid at the end of September. In the meantime, the athletes were getting frustrated, and those frustrations grew when July came and went and the athletes were not paid in full. And in August, Johnson issued a public apology. And this apology went all over the place. Parts of it read like an introspective journal entry, documenting his own transcendental entrepreneurial journey, then to acknowledging that athletes weren't getting paid, but also attributing it to things that were beyond his control, and then promising that athletes would get paid before the 2026 Grand Slam season. That's right, the 2026 Grand Slam season. If you haven't read the public apology, it's worth the read. I found it had very little accountability, but that's just me. I think it's outright crazy that in a span of 2 months, we went from, we've accomplished everything we've wanted to accomplish, to, sorry athletes, we can't actually pay you. Now that we're removed from the August announcement, we know that things didn't catastrophically fall apart in these 2 months. Things were spiraling down for a while. Were they further down the spiral? Yes. But Grand Slam was in no position to pay their athletes in June when they canceled their finale. And they were still in no place to pay all of their athletes. It continued to be true in August. The constant trying to control the narrative and having your finger in the air trying to gauge the public opinion was growing tiresome. Back in June, Grand Slam was on fire, and Michael Johnson was trying to convince you it's actually the Northern Lights. But at least the fire was partially admitted to in August, because he still was claiming this was kind of a success in a metaphoric and spiritual way. I guess Johnson's a very introspective guy. In October, Winners Alliance paid another $5.5 million to Grand Slam to shore up some of the debts owed to its athletes, but it was not near enough. And over the next 2 months, it was reported that Grand Slam sent an ultimatum to its debtors, asking them to take a 50% cut in what they're owed, or the company would risk bankruptcy. And they have until December 5th to decide. Oh, and every vendor needed to sign the document to avoid the risk of bankruptcy. In other words, if you sign this deal, you might get 50% of what you're owed, but if you don't sign, you risk getting 100% of nothing. The letter did not go over well with the vendors, and little to none of them signed. Which leads us to December 2025, when Grand Slam filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And this is where we find out the gross mismanagement of assets by Michael Johnson and his team, as well as the disingenuous deflecting he had done himself in the months prior. Things like drug tests and tariffs weren't nearly affecting the league as much as he said it was. This venture was not a success, it was an outright disaster. In these Chapter 11 filings, Grand Slam is said to have owed between $10 and $50 million to between 200 and 999 vendors, and the company had less than $50,000 worth of assets. In the filings, you can see who a lot of these unpaid debtors are, and a lot of them are athletes. They were collateral damage. So much for paying your athletes 10 times more. If you're in business, the terminology around this is called yikes. Later documents released in the bankruptcy files claim that Grand Slam owes around $31 million to its debtors, so the upper range of that $10 to $50 million. It's not good. And let's just take a moment to reflect what happened. In roughly 1 year, Grand Slam went from a fully funded and $30+ million in financial commitments with the promise to save the sport of track and field and bring it to the next level, to being tens of millions of dollars in debt and garnering the bitterness and resentment from athletes and track-related businesses. After the 3 slams in Kingston, Miramar, and Philadelphia, Grand Slam had sold a total of 64,566 tickets. To put in perspective, if you combine the 3 stadiums' maximum capacity, where all of these slams took place in, you get a maximum capacity of around 94,500 seats. But if you multiply the multiple days in these stadiums in which these slams took place, you get a maximum capacity of around 231,000, meaning Grand Slam sold around 28% of its tickets. Tickets were affordable for first world standards, going from $10 to $20 for general admission in Kingston, $25 to $60 in Miramar, and just over $30 for Philadelphia. And still it was a bust. But one thing was for certain, this whole sleeping demand theory is over. This confirmed what many people already knew. There's very little interest in our sport. To put some more numbers in perspective, Grand Slam's original plan was to pay $12.6 million in prize money, which if we prorate to the 3 meets that actually happened, we get around $9.45 million of prize money. Even if we were generous and we assume that the average ticket sold was $50, Grand Slam would have generated $3.2 million in ticket sales, which means all of your ticket revenue paid for only 1/3 of your prize money alone. Never mind appearance fees, never mind anything else. Of course, once I was done filming, we had more information regarding the bankruptcy files. It turns out that Michael Johnson had only made $1.8 million with his league in revenue and racked up over $40 million in debts. So this estimation of over $3 million in ticket revenue was way overestimating, which also begins the speculation how many of these tickets were actually bought as well, and just the whole situation of the Grand Slam League and their finances was just way more in chaos than we had originally thought. And this is where we're at today. There will certainly be developments in the coming weeks and months where we'll know the direction the bankruptcy is taking Grand Slam, but these filings just left so many questions on like what actually happened. What was the decision-making process on all these decisions? Like, how much money did the January 2025 broadcasting deal actually generate? Obviously not a significant amount. Why was it painted as a big deal? Did anyone in the company look at their projected revenue from there on out and knew they were in trouble and knew they had to pivot from their current game plan? Did they feel that tickets, ads, and merchandise would overcome that? The amount of revenue you generate on this deal is a major sign of your league succeeding. And you know what your costs are gonna be. You know what you're gonna pay your athletes. You know how much you're gonna pay to rent out a stadium. So if your revenue is not meeting your expectations, then pivot. You could have pivoted in real time once you realized your revenues aren't meeting your expectations. So it's time to fix the costs. It's time to host your meet in a more lucrative place. But none of those changes were made. But why? Furthermore, after the Kingston meet, you knew your tickets weren't selling, which is another major source of revenue. You could have pivoted again, but they chose not to, which just left advertising revenue and merchandise to save the company. And unless they sold a couple million t-shirts by March, they should have made some adjustments. After January, they should have scrapped the Kingston meet altogether. Come back to town when you have a stronger balance sheet. But the biggest question of all, and what I hear nobody talking about, was who was in charge of financing Grand Slam and who was in charge of developing it. Michael Johnson gets a lot of the blame for the failure of Grand Slam, but it takes 2 to tango. How did he even get the money? Very few reasonable decisions were made throughout this whole saga. When it was released that Winners Alliance was investing in Grand Slam in June of 2024, it was constantly touted that, Winners Alliance is chaired by Bill Ackman, the hedge fund billionaire. The smart money is investing in track. But if you looked into it, besides helping raise money for Winners Alliance when it was founded, Bill Ackman most likely had nothing to do with Grand Slam at all. The financing and oversight of Grand Slam would have been the responsibility of someone like Ahmed Nassar and Eric Winston of Winners Alliance, their CEO and president respectively. Both of them ended up on the board of Grand Slam, and Nassar was Grand Slam's lead investor. If you're a business and you accept money as an investment, you want to accept money from an institution that shares your values, vision, and the specialty to help you get going. And for sure, Winners Alliance had similar values and vision to Johnson, but Winners Alliance or anybody who worked there has never started a league before, never mind in an amateur sport like track and field. Winners Alliance is a company focused on investing in athlete empowerment and athlete-centric businesses regarding intellectual property. They've partnered with Wildlife Studios to license over 300 players NIL rights for Tennis Clash, a popular mobile game. They've secured deals with major Indian developers for games like World Cricket Championship, incorporating athlete IP into mobile titles. The common theme is group licensing and commercialization. These have to do with group athletes licensing. Does this sound like running and operating a professional sports league for an amateur sport? I don't think so. Nassar went into the Grand Slam partnership treating it like it was any other business, saying, "It's always risky to assume sports are fundamentally different from other industries." And then eventually going on to say, "Not every startup is destined to become the next Google or Nvidia, just as not every league will rival the NFL or UFC. But think about this. 50 years ago, if you had the chance to own not one, but 10 NFL teams, who wouldn't have seized that opportunity?" That's the kind of foresight fueling today's investment in sports. So obviously, Winners Alliance believed they could make a successful track and field league. And they 100% believed in the sleeping demand theory, believing that once the supply was given, people would flock to the league, which would eventually become profitable. And remember, Winners Alliance is also Grand Slam's operational partner, which means they at least in title would have helped Grand Slam actually run things and make these decisions, or at least advised them. Johnson would have had the final say given his voting shares, but he did not exist in a vacuum in his operational role. So if you want to summarize what went wrong for Grand Slam, in my opinion, is that the wrong people were involved all around. Winners Alliance went outside of their expertise when investing in Grand Slam, and Michael Johnson was just the wrong person for the job. This was a time of a FOMO environment where ambition and vision met resources and willpower, while common sense was left out at the front door. Few of the assumptions Winners Alliance and Michael Johnson made were practical, and its execution was extremely lackluster. Everything's a probability. You can work 50 years and retire wealthy, yet some person in a trailer park on welfare wins the lottery and will become more wealthy than you can ever imagine. If it can happen, it will happen. It reminds me of the saying when hard work meets opportunity, but on occasion that hard work is just picking a set of arbitrary numbers on a lottery ticket and the opportunity is billions of dollars. It's not common, but it does happen. A variation of that happened here. A group of investors looking to invest a lot of money in a sport invested in a track league they had no business investing in and found a track legend with a commanding aura and no business acumen to make it happen. In very few circumstances do these two forces come together at the same time in the same place, but it does happen. And that's what happened here. Grand Slam had no business existing, and the only reason it did was from the naivety and ambition of two complementary parties. In any other time or place in track and field, the odds of this happening are exponentially low. Pure happenstance, you can even say. Yet in this universe, it happened. The consequences of Grand Slam's failure in track and field will be profound. No one can say what will happen deep into the future, but in the immediate term, it's not good. This sets a terrible precedent. Any institutional investor presented with a case to invest in track and field will always be wary of what happened with Grand Slam. And rightfully so, because now the denial is over. Our sport is not as popular as many had thought. As I said in my last video regarding Grand Slam, there is no sense in investing money in track and field until your granny can sign up at a local meet for the shot put. Nobody watches track and field because people feel no connection to it. It's out of their realm of understanding. Nobody can appreciate Nico Young's gutsy move in the 5,000 meters at this Tokyo 2025 World Championships, when in the middle of the race he started dropping 61-second 400 meters to try to gap the field. Imagine telling your grandpa that. He watches track once every 4 years at the Olympics. "Grandpa, they went from 66 seconds to 61-second pace in a matter of seconds and suddenly it wasn't a kicker's race." Watch his eyes glaze over. Watch him have flashbacks of Nam. Grandpa isn't buying a ticket to Grand Slam. But if he was an athlete right now, or if he was once an athlete, the odds of him buying a ticket are way higher because he has an attachment. Because he has a realm of understanding of what's happening. For the amount of money Winners Alliance invested in Grand Slam, you need a grassroots revolution in track and field to justify it, and then wait 10 years. It's possible it could happen sooner, but the money will be tight and the right people need to do it. What is the future of Grand Slam is anybody's guess. The odds are it'll just fade away with a whimper, but there is a chance it will continue. In the letter that was sent back to the vendors in October and November, asking the vendors to take a 50% pay cut, reportedly it was claimed that there was an offer to buy Grand Slam outright if its debts were cleared. This sounds like another one of those conditional commitments if true, which at this point beyond the filings, nobody knows what's true or not except for the people on the inside. There are also reports that Grand Slam has already allocated over $400,000 to the 2026 season and are insistent with going through, but the financial world is very complex. Who knows if this report is real or if there's some liability stuff going on, but it could be true. Another sign that this league might continue is that Winners Alliance put another $3 million into Grand Slam on a secured basis to help help shore up some of the payments owed to athletes, as well as help restructure Grand Slam in the filings. Why are they doing that? Again, I don't know. Somebody who specializes in this field will have a way better idea than I do. As for Michael Johnson's involvement in general, the onus of saving track and field fell on the wrong person's shoulders. Even though he took the metaphoric baton without hesitation, he shouldn't have. You can't save track and pay athletes what you think they deserve all at once. You end up over-promising and under-delivering. You have to stingily manage your finances first, and over the years, if you're super profitable, then you can pay your athletes more. But I really do feel bad for him. He honestly thought he knew what track needed, being involved within the sport his whole life. But being a track superstar and allocating capital properly are just two totally different skills. And because he has failed, he has tarnished his legacy forever. He's going to lose whatever money he put into the business, which self-reported is around $2 million. But regardless, however much money he put in, it's gonna go, it's gone, which doesn't feel good. And now the athletes that he wanted to help so bad are bitter towards him because he just bit off more than he could chew. And furthermore, the consequences of his failure have moved beyond the scope of Grand Slam. He's been removed from commentary at BBC because he failed in Grand Slam. I thought track was brutal, but business is equally as brutal. Imagine starting a business that fails and then you go into work and they fire you because your business failed. Brutal. Just absolutely, I'm laughing, but it's absolutely brutal. But over time, his reputation will get better than it is now. And like I said, I do feel bad for him that way. For every 1,000 people who want to revolutionize a sport for the better, only one of them will actually be given a chance. And just imagine saying no to it. You'd been touting for years how you'd save track and field if you were given the chance. And now you have the chance. The biggest investment in our sport's history is in the palm of your hand. You can make an actual impact. You can save track. You can be the hero of our sport and maybe even make a little bit of money while doing it. Ask yourself, would you have turned it down? I wouldn't have. So I believe some mercy is in order here. We can't overlook his intentions despite his failure's consequences for our sport. And if the enhanced games is successful in 2026, maybe that blow will be lessened, but that's a story for another time. Speaking of biting off more than you can chew, this video took way more time than I had originally planned. I know I missed some checkpoints along the way, but in the spirit of brevity and for consideration towards you, the viewer, I decided to cut them out. So if you watch this full thing, please leave a comment down below. I want to personally thank you. I hope you enjoyed it because we have a lot more videos like this, not as long, coming soon. And on that note, I'll see you guys next time.